Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. So my guest today is Lou Maxon, and I'm sitting in Lou's library. So this is an in-person episode, so the sound's going to be different than normal, folks, but you'll get used to that. Lou, thank you for making the time. First off, the space is awesome, but we're going to get to that. Lou, you're a Seattle area designer. We're just going to give you one word description today. But I want to know, how did I end up here today? So what's your career and how did you get to where we are?
Awesome. Well, I think it's if you were going to tell me that we would be sitting here today in the library out in Carnation, I'd probably tell you're pretty crazy because I think, like a lot of things, you set different goals, or you think about different things that you want to do. And then there's some things that sort of intercept and take you on a different path. So, I think my career in design was more of I don't want to say like a happy accident, but it was more of a detour because of different ambitions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you grew up in the Seattle area.
Yep.
And so for full disclosure for everybody, Lou and I tried to record this remotely, and while this is a beautiful library, the Wi-Fi just wasn't cooperating. So we decided to get together in person. So we've already had half of a conversation before. So I'm going to disclose some things in an effort to get the ball moving forward. So Lou grew up in the Seattle area, and you played lacrosse in high school. What I don't remember is, did you play hockey in high school?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you played lacrosse in high school, and you ended up going to Gonzaga University in Spokane, where you played hockey.
And lacrosse.
So before we get going down the design path, one of the things that we didn't talk about before I want to know is, why hockey? What got you going to play collegiate level hockey with not playing it before that?
Yeah. So I think I was like 9 or 10 years old, and for Christmas one year, my dad gave me a table hockey, like rod slider table hockey, and he was from Michigan, grew up in Michigan, huge Red Wings fan. Used to go to Red Wings games at the old, I think it was called the Olympia, where they played before they play now. And I remember, I think just like everything I've gotten into, I get into like 1,000,000%. And so I don't remember specifically what teams that game came with. I think it was like the Flyers, and maybe it's the Flyers and the Islanders. That sounds right. And I remember looking at like the logos, and the players didn't have names on them, but I remember just like being fascinated by hockey. Like the only sort of like DNA evidence I had of hockey was this table hockey game. Like I didn't grow up playing hockey. Hockey was not big in Seattle. I mean, there were minor league hockey teams, and so I just like super got into it. I mean, this is around the time like they had inline skating. We played street hockey. We would, my dad had a place up in the San Juans, and because we were so close to Canada on the weekend, we got Hockey Day in Canada on CBC on Saturdays. So I just remember watching hockey, like just being completely fascinated by it. And I think in some ways it was the perfect sport, both hockey and lacrosse, because it wasn't the usual thing. And I think that's a theme for the rest of our conversation, right? It's not like soccer. I mean, I played soccer growing up,
but once again, it wasn't quite what it is now. And to me, soccer is my friends that are soccer fans, it's not a second class sport, but it's a notch below NBA and NFL, probably on par now with baseball.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was. So I remember. I mean, I remember we had, in elementary school, you'd have like a segment or of like gym class where you do different sports. And I remember when they would bring out the hockey, and they would put like they were like plastic sticks with like a rubber puck, and they'd put socks on the end of the blades just so you didn't hit someone. And I just remember, even then going into high school, we had they also did floor hockey, but they had like a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, like Olympics one week, like different sporting events, and hockey was one of them. And I remember just like playing and dominating in hockey. They would take the gymnastic mats, fold them in, into like hockey, and it was just like a blast. So it was something that it was not really in the cards for me to play recreational hockey or like youth hockey. I mean, I think the closest rink was Linwood. And I played lacrosse, and a lot of hockey players play lacrosse. And there's a version of lacrosse called box lacrosse, which is indoor lacrosse. Like played it like in an indoor soccer facility. So I had basically kind of like taught myself how to skate. I knew the hockey part, but honestly, I went out for Gonzaga had a club hockey team, and so it was, they had like a varsity and a second tier. So I remember I literally got went out and got my equipment, but I literally got my skates like the day of the first practice. So the first time I went out, I'd played hockey like just for fun, but the first practice freshman year, like that was the first time I'd been on ice in hockey, like in full hockey or playing.
Okay.
And it was just like a draft on ice. I mean, it was not pretty, but I figured it out. And I've been playing hockey ever since. I've gotten to, through work and design and then other things, I've actually gotten to play hockey at a much higher level post college than I ever did in college. And my kids grew up, they all played hockey. One of my kids went on to play hockey in college, and I've gotten to play in celebrity hockey games for Ronald McDonald House Charities. And I've gotten to play with NHL players. I've gotten to play like really competitive. And now I play for fun. I play in a beer league a couple times a week.
All right. So I guess we'll go there first. We'll talk hockey before we go into design. But so what you told me before, and I think this was in a conversation after the failed episode, was you were in a hockey fantasy camp because of one of your design clients.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And you kind of played with this hack. And he was kind of noted for like skating where the puck's supposed to be, or 99. Even if you're not a hockey fan, we've all heard the name Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah.
So what I want to know about Wayne Gretzky was, did he take it easy on you, or did you work for it?
I think so. Let me backpedal. Okay, so I'm gonna set the scene. So there's I'm working for I'm running creative and design for Lexus, the car company. The magazine that owners, or if you lease the car, got at the time, had this department in the magazine every issue called Quick Study. Okay. And it was basically where a writer would go do something and immerse themselves in kind of a world that wasn't really necessarily a world that they would ever get to do regularly. So we were on a trip with our client. We were literally sitting in a pool in Monaco, and we're getting ready to pitch ideas for the next issue. It came out 4 times a year. So I'm sitting in the pool with the clients in Monaco. It's like blazing hot. And I had heard about this Gretzky fantasy camp. It costs like $9,999 to go, right? And the concept is you live and are treated like a pro athlete for the week. And this is 2004. So in the pool, hanging out, having drinks with the client, do my spiel, right?
So you're literally pitching in the pool.
I'm literally pitching with my feet dangling in the pool, and they know, like we're close. We're close with like they knew about So we get the green light. It was a little tricky, honestly, because at the time, I think Wayne had brand partnership with Ford. So it was we were a little unsure if it was going to work, but we worked it out. And then also I took a week off, basically off of work, of doing my work. So I went, and it's a classic case, and I think we'll get back to it. So my role was, I was going to be designing that issue of the magazine. So I would design the story of me working, getting to play with Wayne Gretzky for the week. But I was also writing the story. I was writing the article. So I was going to the camp to play and experience it, but I was also writing the story. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a perfect example because I went to Gonzaga to get a journalism degree because I wanted to be a writer-editor. But I knew how to do design. So design was my foot in the door to the writing. So here, I'm literally getting paid to go play hockey with Wayne Gretzky for the week. So I'm in Arizona, in Phoenix and Glendale, because at the time the Arizona Coyotes played in Glendale, and they divide us, and it's a bunch. There's like ex players. There's celebrities. There's owners of hockey teams there. They're paying a lot of money, some flying in on private jets, and they divide us into 4 teams. My team's coached by Wayne's dad, Wayne Gretzky's dad, who basically, is responsible. And I'm, they would do like a couple practices. They draft you into teams, and then you play 1 game with and 1 game against Wayne Gretzky. So, I look up and I'm guarding Wayne Gretzky. He's significantly shorter than me.
Yeah. How tall is Wayne Gretzky?
I think he's, I'm 6'5", so he's right around 6 feet or so, if a little above, a little below. But
okay.
So when you take Wayne Gretzky into the corner, you don't finish the check. And there were guys that, they would give him the business a little bit, and then he would fly by the bench and just, give him a little, and he didn't wear a helmet.
Oh, okay.
So, you just don't go after him. But then on the flip side, you're on ice and you look over and Wayne Gretzky's your line mate. So you don't want to F up the pass. If Wayne Gretzky passes you the puck, you don't want to miss the puck.
Okay.
So, but as a person, amazing. Like, as a kid growing up in Seattle, watching Hockey Night in Canada, to then look up and see that you're playing hockey with Wayne Gretzky, it was one of those things where after it was done, I kind of wanted to go back over and do it again. Like anything that is like, and I think the other thing is you meet a lot of people in media or design. You meet people maybe who you look up to, and then you meet them and it's not all that you had in your head. The exception is Wayne Gretzky. Okay. And I think one of the things I remember, and I have it in my library, but about, after I wrote the article and sent it out, there were other people that were at the Yogi Berra's granddaughter, Lindsay, who wrote for ESPN, was at the camp playing hockey, right? So there were other people there documenting stories of that experience. So I was, just this like hayseed from Washington out there. And about after the article, one day the mail came and I got we had sent Wayne and his people like copies of the magazine, as a thank you. And then one day in the mail I got 2 copies back. One was signed with a handwritten note, not from his agent or not from his like handler, but from him, thanking him for the for the story.
So where my brain goes with all this is arguably the greatest hockey player of all time. And I think of hockey, first off, you look at me, do I look like I'd get on skates? So first off, hockey's intimidating to me because you've got these metal blades on your feet and you've got this gear and you've got sticks that are made out of wood or fiberglass or whatever, carbon fiber now or whatever they're made out of. And you're slapping a hard rubber disc around. The goalies that were playing, were they former NHL players playing goalie, or was it Yogi Berra's granddaughter between the pipes?
It was a mix. I mean, there were members of the 1980 Edmonton Oilers Stanley Cup team. I mean, Paul Coffey was a defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
There were, I recall, there were very good goalies, and I mean, and our it was like a round robin. So everybody played with Wayne, everybody played against Wayne. But when it got to the playoffs, our team made it to the final and won the final, and it was and I remember like my second to last or maybe it's the last shift, it was pretty tight, and we played at their practice arena, then we played the finals in the actual where the Coyotes played. And I remember like Wayne's dad, he on my shift, like he was like, all right, you need to go, and if it goes into the court, you need to like not rough it up, but
go a little harder than you were.
So I remember like going into the boards on someone pretty good, and we won. It was like, you kind of felt like you had won the Stanley Cup. In fact, I think it was that night after we won. I mean, there was celebration in the locker room, and but like that night at the kind of closing ceremonies of the camp, I was standing outside. And I actually went to the camp with my old Gonzaga roommate. He's a big hockey fan, so we were hanging out for the whole week because you could bring somebody. And we saw his car pull up, and the guy comes out, pops the trunk, and I looked at him. I was like, God, this guy looks familiar. And I had watched as a kid all these like VHS tapes of like Stanley Cup games, and there's a guy who's the handler of the Stanley Cup. Like he travels with the Stanley Cup, and I was looking up, and I was like, that's the guy. He goes in the trunk, takes out this big box, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I was like, you're Phil, like you're the guy. And so we're sitting in like the banquet room, and they're giving out the awards, and I have a signed stick from Wayne because from our win, and then this guy walks in, and he brings this. They had the Stanley Cup brought in for this, and so everybody got to go up, and I got to lift. I mean, you're not supposed to touch the cup. That's the thing. If you're a current player, you don't touch the cup unless you've won it.
Okay.
And I was not going to win the Stanley Cup because I was not playing in the NHL at that time. But I got to lift the Stanley Cup. Like I got to lift it above my head at this thing. There's a video of it floating around YouTube somewhere. It was like, oh my gosh, this is like I remember fake lifting up the cup like on my street.
And now here you are. All right. So the reason I ask about the goalies is the idea that Wayne Gretzky could be taking a shot on goal to some amateur doesn't seem fair.
No.
And so I was hoping that you were going to say that the goalies were at least, people that were highly proficient hockey players as goalies. Okay, so let's tie this back to college. So the client that greenlighted this was Lexus, and this is about 2004.
Yeah.
How did you go from Gonzaga to Lexus?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the year between my junior year and senior year, I was on track. So I was a journalism major, and at Gonzaga, that was pretty much newspaper journalism. So I was writing for the paper. I was also running design for student publications. So I was designing ads that would go in the publications. So I was within the Gonzaga world. I was on the pathway. I was also an intern at the Inlander, which is like the Seattle Weekly of Spokane. Mm-hmm. So I was a non-paid production intern there. So while at Gonzaga, I was doing a weekly newspaper. I was doing my full course of classes. I was interning at also interning at the Inlander, and I was playing hockey. So I had a busy time. My summer between my junior and senior year, a professor had come to me and said, "Hey, we have this partnership with Fordham, which is another Jesuit school in New York. They're doing like this media program, and I think I can get you in there. I think you apply for the scholarship and you go and live in New York for the summer." And I had been to New York, but like visiting family, but not working. So I was like, okay. So I filled it out and got in. And so I moved to New York, and I worked, I interned at like a couple different places. One of the places was a magazine, independent magazine, but a real magazine distributed at the bookstore and everything around the country, called KGB. It was kind of this like counterculture, independent magazine of arts culture, and it was run by these two guys from Harvard. One of them was the film editor was Darren Aronofsky, the film director who just did The Whale, okay, and did Pi and did Requiem for a Dream. He was the film editor of the magazine, and so I joined as like an intern for the summer, and I got to go around, and like not only was I in New York taking classes at Fordham, but I was kind of getting a taste of the magazine life, appetizer platter, and so I did that for the summer, and then came back to Gonzaga in the fall. Tough to go from New York to Spokane, but like, it was, and even though, it's like when you've got a taste of what's happening in the world, and then you go back to the academic world where you're still in that track. Right. And, I knew I wanted to do magazines. Like I wanted to be a magazine designer. That was clear, and I wanted to just be involved with. And I think like working in media, it's like a team sport, right? So hockey and like it just like for me, it made sense. So graduated from Gonzaga in May. Worked at this small marketing communications firm in Seattle, and I knew when I got there. Also, like I had the same feeling when I was there as I did right when I got back from school, from being in New York. Like, this is not it. Like I'm far away, from geographically and like conceptually from what I was just doing in New York. So, so that was graduated in May, worked kind of over the summer. In August, it's early August. I'm getting off work, one of those beautiful Seattle August days, taking the Metro number 2 from Queen Anne home, living at home, like moved back home, and going down kind of right by where Key Arena was. The wires pop off the bus. Bus is stopped. I'm right across the street from the Romper Room on Lower Queen Anne.
Okay,
this bar. Right on the corner from Jalisco's. The Mexican restaurant was right there. Anyway, neither of those two things are there anymore. So I have the choice. I can wait for the next bus, or I can pop in the Romper Room. And I honestly I was supposed to meet a good friend of mine there, and then it just didn't work out. And there's no cell phones.
Right.
Right. So I pop in there, and 2 women walk in. Bars, I mean, it's like 5 o'clock. It's still pretty empty, and they're like, "Hey, can we sit down with you?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And at that moment, like I met my wife. Like she was there with her friend. She lived like right around the corner from the Romper Room, and I just graduated, working at this little place, and hit it off. And my plan was like, how quickly can I get back to New York? And I think I even told her like that night, I was like, "Hey, look, like it was Thursday. I'll call you. I think I had like an interview for something in New York. And I was like, hey, let's go out next week or something, fast forward to October, we moved to New York together. and I was like, hey, I'm moving to New York. My dream is to work on a magazine or whatever. And she'd never been to New York. And, so we moved there with no job. We had in New York, you have to have like a tri-state guarantor to guarantee your rent if you don't have a job.
I did not know that. Okay.
So we had these people we met. They drove a U-Haul across the country. They wanted to go on a trip, so they drove a U-Haul. We didn't have much. Moved to New York. My first job was like a contract job, like collating media kits for Patti LaBelle. So I'm in New York, but I'm not close. Like I'm on the green, but I'm not I'm not putting for, I'm not doing a design job. And at that time you're looking for jobs in the newspaper. So I found this listing. It was for the Village Voice, and they were looking for a designer. So I applied. At that time, basically all I had for work was a few things I had kind of lightly touched at the marketing firm. But what I did have was I had my own independent zine that I started basically at Gonzaga, because in order to get a job, I needed work. But in order to get work, I needed a job. So I basically started this zine called Code. And it was kind of like KGB. It was like kind of a downriver version of KGB. It was like culture, media, arts. We interviewed musicians. We did, and I met a lot of people when I was in New York. So I would just hire them as writers. And I wasn't paying. It was just for fun. It was basically a portfolio piece in the form of a magazine to get enough experience to show someone that I could do the work. So
now what you're leaving out though is that zine ended up in Tower Records, Tower Books.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like you were giving it away out of the back of your car.
No. And it was a follow-up to getting having a taste of that in high school. I got asked to do, I was like the design, there was like two halves of this other thing I worked on. And I was the other half because I knew how to design. Right. So, we got our hands slapped a little bit and we got in trouble. And I was like, oh man. And that also helped, I think, amp up my ambition to study this at Gonzaga, because I was like, oh, this is kind of dangerous. Like this is a little, the first kind of taste of, as Steve Jobs would say, like, why join the Navy when you can be a pirate? And I think I've always sort of I've always sort of figured out where everybody else is going and then gone the other way, a la Gretzky, and in terms of philosophy. So I'm interviewing, I got the job at the Village Voice, and, it was good, but it wasn't a magazine, right? It was like, I'd worked at the Inlander, which was like a weekly. The Village Voice is iconic. I mean, I think it's still around digitally, but the print, it went out every week. Some of the top writers, it was a really good experience, but I wanted to work at a magazine. So I answered another ad in New York Times. And there was a startup called Time Out New York. It was started by this guy in London who had Time Out London, who had started it as a zine, as a way to like promote all these places he wanted to go. Basically, he didn't see that, so he created it, right? Which I loved. So I applied there were two jobs. There was an editorial designer and there was an editorial designer and promotions designer. So I applied for editorial designer. I got the job offered that was editorial designer plus promotions because I had done some marketing and advertising, even though I wouldn't say I'd done marketing and advertising. I had done a little bit. And honestly, like that, I was like, I think it was like $24,000 a year, 1996, and I'm thinking, wow, that seemed like a lot of money, but it was not a lot of money. And then New York, and then federal tax, and then state tax, and then city tax. I probably was giving it away. I mean, but I was working at a magazine. It was a weekly magazine. It was like over 100 pages. Time Out was known for their iconic covers, and it was a listings magazine. So it had features, and then a lot of it was just like art, dance, culture, things to do. But they had a partnership with Penguin. And so they would do guidebooks. And part of the promotions part of the job was that I not only designed my section of the magazine, but I also designed all the promotions for like when they do like a Summerfest music festival or this or that. So suddenly I went from doing the zine to now I'm like going on photo shoots with the Wu-Tang Clan or, and it's a little bit fake it till you make it, because I kind of taught myself how to do enough to do my thing, but now I'm doing it like for a legit, operation. And so it was really great. So I did that for a while. And then so I went from like a zine to a weekly Village Voice to a weekly magazine. The next step, I guess, would be a monthly mass consumer magazine. So there was a company called Gruner and Yar. They were owned by Bertelsmann, the company that you used to like get dollar CDs for, like in the ads and stuff. And they had Fitness, Family Circle, McCall's. They had these portfolio reviews. So by this time, like I've got some Time Out stuff. I've got I'm showing code in my portfolio. I've got like Bayliner from the marketing, So I've got like luxury, Bayliner and Maxim yachts. I've got this little like handcrafted zine, and then I've got a little bit of Village Voice and some Time Out. Like I'm starting to build a thing. And fast forward, it's between McCall's, which is kind of like your grandmother's magazine, and YM, which is like your teenage daughter's magazine. Like, and I took the job at YM. This is like during when like Prince William, Alicia Silverstone, Clueless, celebrity driven covers, super bright colors. And I'm doing like flow charts, like, does he love you? And I'm doing like information design. I mean, I'm doing like really complex infographics, targeted to like teenage audience. So fantastic. I feel, and now I'm like a senior designer, moving up to like art director at YM. And then, right around the time we flew back, so this is like 90, let's see, 98, we got married in Seattle. It was one of those things like super hot in New York. Fly back, get married, have our reception on the Scansonia on Lake Union. Beautiful day, and you're like having these flickers of the Pacific Northwest. So then get married, go on a honeymoon, come back to New York, work. And then we had this deal between my wife and I that at any time past like a certain amount of time that we lived there, we could just say, okay, we're going to go back.
Okay.
So we moved back. Let
me ask you this question. Yeah. Whose idea was it to move back?
I mean, I think it was kind of both of our, like I think we had a little bit of homesick nostalgia after the wedding. Like you're in Seattle, you're on the boat, all the family's there. It's not 900 degrees,
and humid.
I feel like my wife was working on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs. I was working at a national consumer magazine, right? Like I went from like collating media kits for Patti LaBelle to work to my dream, right? And I thought, okay, like I'm on my, like I scratched that itch. If I left today, I would have no regrets. And we were walking home one day and we saw this guy pushing this cart down our street, and with a big, like he had like a huge knife, and then we heard like there was like a knife fight on our street, and we were just like, this is like, this is not going to work. And we didn't see a way to sort of move up, like get a bigger place. Like we weren't sure that was in our cards. So we left, we moved back. And this is right near, I mean, getting into like 9/11, when the magazine industry basically came to and the financial came to a halt. So moved back. And I remember moving back and thinking, like, this is it. Like, the best moment of my career has happened. Because Seattle was still a little. I mean, it was there were ad agencies. There weren't really magazines. There was Seattle Magazine, which was pretty much it. There was the Seattle Weekly. There was the Stranger, right? So for publication design, there wasn't a lot. Moved back. Actually worked at an ad agency at Publicis, the agency that took the account away from the marketing agency I'd worked at right out of college. So now I'm running that, like, and they're like, hey, can you, we need you to design like 6 catalogs this year. And I had just come from like designing 52 magazines in a year. So I'm like, you're giving me a year to do 6 catalogs? I don't know if this is going to work. I'd get bored out of my mind. So while I was working at Publicis, I saw like a little ad. I don't know, it was like the Seattle Times or the Weekly, and it was like looking for a designer to design a prototype for a new city magazine. I was like, oh man, this looks cool. So like I actually created a prototype. There was a magazine called Metropolitan Living, not Seattle Metropolitan.
No, Metropolitan Living.
Yeah. And so I created a prototype, met the owner. The owner had never done a magazine. Didn't really have he had like a background doing like kind of more like a B2B magazine or B2B like newspaper. But so presented it to him, had a whole vision for it, everything, and got selected. And so the first issue we have of Metropolitan Living. So I'm at University of Washington with Rick Neuheisel. So one of the coolest parts I think about being in media is you get to meet people that you've like grown up like hearing about, and then do stories. So this is pre Rick Neuheisel getting, so we're like on the field, and I have this idea. I'm like, hey, he had just gotten hired, and we had a ladder, and I was like, hey, I'm with the photographers there, and I was like, hey, will you like lay down on like the 50-yard line and we'll shoot you from above, kind of get the whole field and the stadium. And I remember him being like, I'm not laying down on the job. Like I'm not. And I was like a little funny in hindsight. Anyway, so we were like throwing he was a quarterback. So we were like throwing footballs at Husky Stadium. Like, how cool is this? I mean, I was like I didn't play football. I played like flag football, but to throw, like I was a member of like the junior Husky club, and to like throw footballs at Husky Stadium, like, oh, cool. One of those cool sports moments. So we launched Metropolitan Living. Within an issue, Seattle Magazine was nervous, right? Like it was a bigger size. It was bolder design wise. And I think after like my first year there, I started getting, hey, would you consider coming to Seattle Magazine? So in some ways, Metropolitan Living was like code again. It was like this experimental platform, and it was free, so we didn't have cover lines. So it wasn't a hard sell. It was like you could just go pick it up. Like, so there was a lot more freedom. And so I went in. I got the job at Seattle Magazine. I was there for I think 3 years. After like 6 months, I remember coming in one day, and there was this thing on my chair. And I looked, and it was an award, and I didn't enter it, and it was for like best editorial design for City Magazine, and I was like, oh, so it's kind of weird because now it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm at Seattle Magazine now, and I had a rule at Seattle Magazine: no Space Needles. Like that was my rule. I was like, this was a magazine not for people who came to visit Seattle. This is a magazine for people who lived in Seattle. So my first thing was and it was even before I was working in brand, really was like, how do I create a set of values that make the magazine stand out from being something else. And the expected things that you think about Seattle at the time, you know, like grunge and Space Needle and monorail and all those things, were things that I wanted to dig deeper. I wanted the magazine to represent what it was really like to live here. So I had a no Space Needle rule. And we were like in the shadow of the Space Needle. So every time I looked out, like, oh, there's the Space Needle. So I was at Seattle Magazine for 3 years. Completely redesigned the magazine. In fact, the redesign we did at Seattle Magazine lasted for like 10 years. It was crazy. Magazine won some awards. One day I get a call from a recruiter and they're like, hey, we're interested in having you interview for this job. And I was like, what was the job? I was like, well, we really can't. It was at this company called Story Worldwide. And they're like, we can't, we have a client in mind, and it would be like a step up, like design director, kind of creative director level. We can't tell you who it's for, but it's in the auto category. And I was like, okay. So I went to interview, and it was a full-time contract job. It wasn't a full-time job. So it wasn't a full-time like benefits job. It was like, we pay you a lot of money, but you have to pay your own taxes and all your stuff. Right. I was like, okay. And you know, we had had our first kid. So we're like, oh, this isn't really, I mean, the job sounded interesting, but it was like, I don't know if this is really great. So I was like, okay. So I went and interviewed. They offered me the role, and then I found out what it was. I was like, oh, wow. Like Lexus. Like, so now I'm going from like Zine, Metropolitan Living, Seattle Magazine to like international brand. And it's a brand job. It's like a brand. It's running the magazine, but also it's representing a brand. It's a magazine and a branded content job. It's not a, here's 50 top doctors.
Right. Not a bunch of listicles.
No, it's not about, and I mean, Seattle Magazine, I mean, it was, you know, I ate my way through Seattle in the best restaurants issue. And I mean, we were having lunch with Terry Raderow, you know, we were traveling around and getting to go to these Northwest getaways. I was doing shoots in these beautiful Pacific Northwest homes. You know, I got to do a shoot with Rick the Peanut Man at Safeco Field. I got to sit in the camera well with Lou Piniella for a Mariners game. I got to do shoot around when the women's basketball, when the WNBA
with the
game.
Storm? Okay.
Yeah. It was, I got to do a bunch of cool Seattle things. So it was a really great stepping stone. But Lexus was like completely different level.
Okay, I want to interrupt you because I want to talk about the Seattle, sitting in the camera well with Lou Piniella. The beautiful thing about this show is that I'm the one that gets asked the question. So this is the question I want to know. What was Lou Piniella like in person?
So, you know, I mean, I liked baseball a lot. I like, before hockey was on my radar, I would say I was a baseball guy. Okay. Like I was a huge Detroit Tigers fan because my family was in Detroit, right? My favorite baseball player was Lou Whitaker.
Okay.
Second base, number one. Mm-hmm. I love the story of him playing the All-Star game, forgetting his jersey, and Sharpie marking the number one on the back of his jersey, then hitting like a home run over Tiger Stadium in the All-Star game.
I don't know that story. That's a cool story. Okay.
So I love baseball. I thought I was going to play like I played baseball up until high school. And I thought I wanted to play baseball in high school. I love baseball. I had baseball cards. I had Bill James baseball book. Mm-hmm. I did rotisserie baseball with the Yoo-hoo. I was into baseball big time.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew of Lou Piniella. I knew of the fiery,
right?
You know, but and you always feel, you know, when you're the media and you get to have access to people like that, you kind of always feel like you're already getting in the way. Mm-hmm. You know, so we were there and we were shooting, and I was with a good friend of mine, photographer, and I remember like he came out and he's kind of I mean, I'm a tall guy, but he's an imposing figure. Like all the things that you hear about him run through your head. And I remember they were like in batting practice. So he came over, he shook my hand. Hey, Lou. And then I remember him handing me the bat, a bat, like, cause he was, I don't know, he was coming out into the dugout, and he handed me the bat, and I'm like so excited, like this beautiful bat, and I reach it, and it's just riddled in pine tar. So the whole night I had just like
tar all over
my hand. And I mean, we just like took some portraits of him, and you know, very probably very well media trained, very cordial, but like to sit that they're sitting in the stands, but there's like when you're on the field during a game, you don't realize all the semantics of baseball. You know, like when you're watching it in the stands or you're watching it on TV, the focus is the pitcher batter. But when you see the culture of baseball, like it's, and you don't like, why does the manager wear a uniform? He's not playing, but he's playing in his mind. Right. Like there's these like, and I'll never forget it. I mean, even though I haven't followed baseball as closely as before, but anytime I go to a Mariners game, I remember that. And you see the relationship with the players and the motivations. And he did not disappoint. It's very strange for me to turn on the TV and see him in a Shag commercial.
Very, very odd. Yes. And I'm glad you referenced that, because it's just very, very odd, because I just remember him. I remember being, you know, a long suffering Mariners fan, right? And Lou Piniella coming to manage the team was like a badge of, what's the word I'm struggling, but like legitimacy.
Oh yeah.
Like, and then there had been legitimate managers and players for the Mariners before, but Lou Piniella, Yankees manager, Piniella, Yankees manager, and his personality molded those teams, and those teams, they didn't win a lot. Some did win, but you know, but the point is, Lou Piniella put his imprint on the city.
Yeah.
And so that's very cool that you got to sit with him. Okay. So Lexus.
Yeah.
Brand management, magazine, but you're a contractor.
Yeah, I'm contractor for I think I was contractor for like 6 months. I remember the first time I had to pay taxes, and I was like, oh man, that's a lot. And then I got offered full time. So I was there for a little over 5 years. It was like that, you know, people ask like, oh, tell me like the job that transformed your career. I mean, that would definitely be the job. I mean, at that point, like everything changed for me creatively. I think for like my wife and I, for our family. But it wouldn't have ever happened if I would have never done those other things. Well, you know,
everything leads you to where you are today will lead you to where you're going to be in 5 years.
Yeah.
So I see that. But so this was a departure from what you had been doing previously after post college. And then so you were with Lexus for 5 years. And what I'm noticing when you describe these things is you've said this like multiple times now. Well, I was looking at the jobs online or in a paper. So it seems like you're always trying to be aware of what opportunities may present themselves to you, which is the hallmark of somebody who's ambitious and creative, in my opinion. One would say you could have stayed at Lexus until you retired. It would have been a fine career.
Yeah.
What paper were you looking in when you left Lexus?
Well, no, I mean that was the thing is I think my looking was sort of done by the time I got to when I was in New York and got the YM job, because I wasn't really, I could have stayed there easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
But moving back to Seattle, working at an ad agency again. I needed to like find that job, but at Seattle Magazine, I could have stayed there for a long time. Like when they reached, I wasn't looking. They reached. I got headhunted for that job, and so when it was like I guess in the magazine or in the brand world that would be like playing in. Seattle Magazine was still like major league, but it would be like playing in Tacoma and then getting called up to the show, right? Because Lexus on a bigger level wasn't just a magazine; it was a much bigger job. It wasn't just like doing issues of the magazine. It was
it's a global brand.
Yeah.
I mean, the Seattle Magazine. Yes, I'm sure people read it outside of the city of Seattle, but it is Seattle.
Yeah,
where Lexus is global.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that was super powerful for both at Metropolitan Living and at Lexus was that we didn't have Metropolitan Living definitely did not have a lot of money. Seattle Magazine also limited in terms of who we could hire.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of talent development, you know. And so when I think about minor leagues, I think about, okay, the thing that I can give that I can't give a lot of money to like these photographers or illustrators, but what I can promise is that I can give them a great piece that they can use to get to develop, to get further,
build their portfolio.
Yeah.
With.
So a lot of people that I started with at Metropolitan Living came with me, and one super quick story, which I think is fun, and someone that I've been good friends with since is at Seattle Magazine. I had worked with this photographer who I gave his first assignment to at Metropolitan Living. His name is Thor Radford, a good friend of mine to this day, and we're doing the restaurants issue. And there was kind of like this. There's kind of a few go-tos in Seattle for food stuff, but this was editorial. This wasn't like shooting fancy food in a studio. And one thing that I love to do, back to the spirit of like everybody goes left and I go right, is to find something in either someone's personal work. Like, so people would come and show me their portfolios and I would look at everything. And for me, and I to this day I even tell like students, in your professional work, I want to see like a consistency of delivery. But in your personal work, like if you're doing stuff outside of your regular job, like I want to see the vision. Like I want to see what it is that if everybody's lined up and can do the fundamentals, like what is the thing that makes you stand out from that? And so we had shot all these food things, and so Thor was living in Spokane. I called him up. I said, hey, we're going to do this best restaurants. We have a week to like hit 40 restaurants, eat the best food in Seattle for a week. I was like, have you ever shot food? And this is over the phone. He's like, not really, no. But I had seen him shoot other things, right? And so I was like, okay, go down the street, like go get a tart, go get like a lemon tart down at the grocery, right? Bring it back, and I'm gonna art direct you over the phone, and then you're gonna shoot a Polaroid. Because it's so Polaroid, no digital. Take a photo of it, email it to me, and I'll show the editor. So I literally directed him to shoot this like fake shot of this chart. I put it into a fake layout, went to the editor, showed it to her, and had it like enough nudging to get her. She was like unsure because like this is not the usual suspect. Thor, gets the job, travels over, and we spend the week shooting. And he shot the whole thing, and then after that, like suddenly now he's shooting food, right? So I think it's a little bit back to your Lou Piniella thing, right? I think it's like, how do you, like, there's players that you can expect certain things out of. How do you find the kind of like nuance with teams, whether you're doing a project or you're managing a team, like the kind of the stuff that more you kind of observe and see in the locker room versus the stuff you see in the field. And I think that kind of stuff from sports, or just like seeing that or leading that, helps to great work, and also helps to, because the people who are the best creatively at what they do, they're not waking up and flipping it on at 8 and then shutting it off at 4. Like, they're living full on creative lives, right? So it took those early jobs to get that. Lexus, I was on a whole nother level, just because suddenly you go from being the Oakland A's to the New York Yankees, right? And you can spend some money, right? So now we're flying to Singapore for the week and following a chef,
or Morocco,
or shooting
or Monaco,
shooting a chef at the fresh market chopping off a frog leg, and then I mean, like, it was insane. It was a good time economically, right? And we would fly to London for a meeting. We were flying and there was an international version of the magazine, and but one thing was, we did all this. We started getting into films. Like, we were taking stories that we were producing for the magazine, and then we would go shoot, and we would create a film of it, like a film version, like kind of like Evening Magazine, but like a higher premium. I had this like aesthetic from Code that was like, when we were like putting pieces of pizza in a scanner and to get to now we're like eating at like the finest. And my aesthetic for design went from sort of this like very analog and not very digital, pixel perfect, to like very beautiful and clean, like very Mr. Clean. Lexus was, I mean, it's Japanese. It's edited down to its essence. What I learned from that job was, I had come from YM, which was like being in Times Square, to like Lexus, which was like being in a bento box.
right. Okay.
And so it was very helpful for me, because my natural instinct was like kind of to MacGyver stuff together, and I kind of had to learn this. And I didn't go to design school, so I don't know like Swiss from whatever, but I learned a ton. I fell in love aesthetically with a lot of the brand, Japan, beauty, simplicity. But the thing that kind of changed me at Lexus wasn't necessarily, I mean, career-wise, I was on a trajectory, but personally, we were doing we were shooting these cars in these amazing places, and we had budget. We did this story. It was in China, and it was a series of boutique hotels near the Great Wall, designed by different architects. And I remember getting the film back and going through to create the layouts, and there was like these two prints. One was like this beautiful cast in place concrete wall with a single tree and this like wood planking, and the other was this beautiful board formed concrete texture stairs. And I put like the two images together, and we did the head. And I remember like just staring at those images, and like architecturally, like I felt like I was there, but there was like this moment of Lexus Japanese editorial design clarity. I was like, man, like I'd been in these spaces in Seattle, these different architects, but at that moment I was like, I'd never seen anything like that. It was like going from black and white to color. And I remember like telling my wife, like, maybe like someday we do our own place, we do our own thing. I don't know, like it stuck with me. I ended up leaving the agency that we did, because we did the agency that we did Lexus with. We did other work. Like it wasn't majority was Lexus, but the next level was actually a creative director, which was like the top of the ladder. So I got a call from a headhunter. So now this is like the new thing, right? Now I'm not looking; they're looking, and there was a startup in Seattle that was doing like, they had come from Canada and they came to Seattle, and they were doing health and wellness, but for companies. So they were working with like Starbucks. So the goal was to create health and wellness programs even before wellness was cool. Like wellness was like, you know, and they'd already interviewed, they're already in their final interview. Like I missed the whole loop. It was, but out of the blue, they're like, would you come in for an interview? Right. And I was like, okay. So I went in for an interview, met the founder, met some of the team, and they're like, all right. Like, and it was a creative director job. Like it wasn't necessarily, it was more money than Lexus, which was kind of weird, but it was a startup. So it wasn't the global visibility. It was a little bit more money, but it was a higher title, right? It was the title I needed to be at to be like in the next thing. So I took it, and we created it was creating, unlike Lexus, which was established, but we were spreading Lexus stories and around the world. This was like creating something from scratch, kind of like Metropolitan Living, kind of like the zine, but directly for a brand, no magazine. So I did that. I did that for a while. I actually ended up working with Thor.
Okay.
Again, he shot a lot of the stuff. We really didn't have a lot of money at all for startup, so we had to get crafty. But I used a lot of I use a lot of editorial storytelling for kind of not a corporate, for a brand. And I got to work with Starbucks. We created a smoothie that became the Vivano at Starbucks, which is kind of cool. I got to create some things so I was working with brand collaboration, and so every job is kind of like unlocking a new key of the puzzle. And then the brand got bought by Regents Blue Shield, and went through a few CEOs. It was typical startup. It was funded by Mavron, which is like a big local VC company,
right.
started by Howard Schultz. And so I got so I wasn't sure, like it was like, you know, the goal was to kind of get acquired, and you know, and so that happened pretty quickly, like two years or something. I got a call from a recruiter, and they're like, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested. There's this footwear brand in Seattle, kind of at this like critical moment. We've had a lot of people in, haven't really quite figured out, not sure about the in-house team. I was like, oh, who's it for? I was like, Brooks. And I was like, Brooks, like I was not a runner. I was like playing hockey. And so I went in, did the interviews. Super great guy, Dave Larson, was a VP of marketing, ex-Nike. And I kind of liked the fact that they said it was kind of it wasn't a dead end. It was kind of like an mission impossible. Like you got this group that we kind of need to figure out, and we're at this kind of point in the business. So came in there, sort of just like listened, had an in-house group of creatives for the first time. Like I had managed people, but now I had a whole team.
Okay.
And then they had an agency. So now I'm working for a brand, managing a team, and I've got an agency externally. So I've kind of got a little, it's like cake and eat it too, right? Because I was operating coming from Lexus at that brand agency level. So I totally related to the agency point of view. What I didn't have was what I kind of had a little bit from Seattle Magazine, because I had folks that reported to me, was having my own team internally at a brand. So now I'm doing that. Kind of had to learn like the running. Like I wasn't a runner. Like you go find someone at lunch, like, oh, they're running like a half marathon for lunch. Super running culture. The brand was pivoting, and it was at that time. It was almost like it was kind of like very serious, like running, like all Nike, Brooks, all these brands, like running is hard. It's sweat, big sweat, you know, like, you know, it's painful. And Brooks's positioning was that we make, it's the perfect ride for every stride, right? So whether you have your gates all whacked out, or you're this or you're that, like we can carry you through the spectrum from whatever kind of runner you are to where you want to be. And then also, we want to make gear that helps you run better, right? So did a lot of research, worked closely with the team, and then basically ended up relaunching a position that they had before, but they didn't really activate, called Run Happy. And it wasn't a campaign that lasted like for a few months. It was it was an oxygen, right? It was a way of life. So my boss, Dave Larson's boss, is Jim Weber, who's CEO of Brooks. Also was, as I understand it, his roommate was the backup goalie for the 1980 men's hockey team that won at Lake Placid.
Right.
So here's hockey and running coming together. So suddenly I'm playing in the U.S. Brooks versus U.S. or Canada Brooks sales meeting up at Whistler with Jim Weber.
Okay.
Playing hockey, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I played on. Jim snuck me onto his his rec league hockey team.
Okay.
And Jim's boss became Warren Buffett because Berkshire bought Brooks, right? So
I did not know that.
So I'm coming from this super clean, very perfect, pixel perfect Lexus world, and Dave is completely the opposite. Dave Larson's completely the opposite. He's, fun, very unorthodox, very different, like marketing wise. So I kind of had to unlearn Lexus and not grow my hair out, but I had to kind of like let loose. I had to kind of get back to code a little bit.
Okay.
Have a little bit more fun. So we launched Run Happy. It goes crazy. We're working with the Sklar brothers, who are like brother comedians. They did Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And so suddenly we're shooting commercial TV down in California. I had been itching to the shoebox when I got there was blue. It was a flood of blue. It was, if there was any more blue, it would have been the ocean. And I remember I had worked with this illustrator named Peter Arkell at Lexus, and I went into Dave and I went into Jim, and just like even within like the first 3 months, I was like, we got to do something about this box. If we're gonna be Run Happy, we can't be this like corporate blob, right? So I had this vision of creating a shoebox that celebrated all that point of view of like perfect ride for every stride, and every means everyone, right? And so that's like I'm running for a cause. I'm pushing person in a wheelchair. I'm going for my personal record. It's a porta potty running. It's Elvis running. It's like. And Jim was like, we're not quite ready. Like, we're not, I see what you're doing, but we're not quite there. So I just kept pushing. And then finally, like the brand was at a point where we could really let the hair out and just kind of go. And so went in again, said yes, commissioned Peter. We created a whole visual library of illustrations of the community of runners. We had sponsored athletes. And it was really important for me. This project was super important for me because I had worked with illustrators before at Seattle Magazine and the other projects, and at YM we did these like fantastic, like really bold things, but they were just kind of cheeky and fun. And it was like, oh, my boyfriend loves me, or this. It was like, it wasn't like the New Yorker, right? But with illustration, but the difference between photography and illustration, photography is like, if you look outside, there is the tree, right? But illustration is imagination. And what is that tree, and how does it look through the eyes of this brand, right? There's a lot of pictures of people running left and running right. There's pictures of your shoe, the bottom of your shoe. You're running up the hill, you're running down the hill. But when you imagine a world illustrated through the lens of the brand values, like you can own that. And that's something that's hard. Jim used to say, like, we need to build a moat around the brand, right? A defensible moat. And our things that we need to create need to be ours. So doing this box, it was like one of the most sustainable boxes. I got to be on the sustainable committee, and I had done some of that with Lexus, but it was huge. So I was at Brooks. The company that I worked at before, the startup, called me back. They couldn't quite figure out what to do at Regents. Like the soul of the when it got acquired, it kind of got corporate. The founder called me. I had been at Brooks 3 years. We had just bought land here in Carnation because we were starting to imagine this project. And so I went back to the startup. First time ever in my entire career that I boomeranged back to a place. It always seems different in your mind, and then you get there and you realize maybe why you left. So I literally stayed for a calendar year because that was kind of I just needed this. And this woman that I worked with the first time at that same startup had since gone to an ad agency in Seattle. And she called me and said, "Hey, I just got this job. We need an executive creative director for this agency, office in LA, office in Seattle. Would you come?" So I left. So.
Oh, yes, I will.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now I'm back at an agency, and we're agencies, like, you're pitching work, you're managing existing work, you're growing clients, you're growing business within existing clients. It wasn't necessarily things I hadn't done before, but there were a few things that stood out. This is around the time Microsoft was launching Windows 8. We were working with Acer, Taiwanese hardware company, and the new Star Trek was coming from Paramount, directed by J.J. Abrams. And Acer, as is the case with films, they get companies to offset cost. So Microsoft was the software kind of tech sponsor, and Acer was the hardware. Acer was going through a rebrand. So again, the window of time of these career moves has been really great, and some lucky because you don't know. Right. But Acer was redoing their positioning globally. And it was sort of this exploration, and Star Trek is all about exploration to new places, right? So you have this brand and it's like explore beyond limits. So you have this Acer and you have Star Trek and Microsoft. So Microsoft's wanting to, promote the touch of Windows 8. And so my job was to come up with a way to integrate Acer that made sense with the context. And the movie's set in the future, so the products aren't even there, right? And so we got to go down to Paramount. We would go down there. We got to see different parts of the movie, but we never got to see the whole movie. And you couldn't take parts with you back. Like, you get to see like previews of it, and you can never release anything commercially that hadn't already been in a trailer or a teaser. Okay. But there's a part in the movie, spoiler alert, I mean, the movie's been out for a long time, so where one character's in a room that you can't get out of because there's like chemicals, and Spock's on the other side of the glass, and they touch their hands to the glass, and I was like, oh man, this is like, I mean, I didn't write the movie, but I was like, oh, thank you, J.J. Abrams. Because like, this is touch. Like, this is like literally like the software potential of like human connection, right? We couldn't use it because it would give away like that critical part in the movie. But what we did was had to create two storylines. One, sort of everything that happens within the ship, which is lightness. Everything's white and bright and hopeful. And then everything that happens outside the ship, which is dark and mysterious. And so we use those sort of like inspired by the film and created these. They're also introducing a new product that sort of looked like it was a laptop that the keyboard detached from the screen to become a tablet. And so we had to create these spots that looked like they were in the film but weren't in the film. So there were moments of B-roll from the actual trailer spliced together with these CGI kind of moments. And I remember we had to send them for approval to Paramount, I'm sure Microsoft, Acer, and Bad Robot, which is J.J. Abrams. And like they're like, oh, like this is wow, this actually, this actually works. And I mean, everybody knows Star Trek, and it's like, oh, J.J. Abrams, like gigantic, insane. So here we are sending this thing over the fence, and apparently they ended up liking it so much that they ended up providing the score for the spot. So, and it was one of those kind of moments too, where you're like then you're realizing like, oh man, like I'm watching Lost, and I'm watching, oh, this is the guy that is the mind behind this thing. So, it's kind of like the athlete thing, like the Gretzky thing, whatever. Like suddenly, like you're working in the same oxygen space as these people that you've like grown up watching, and so it's like super super powerful for me to be there like at that time. I ended up I remember there was a baseball game in Seattle. There was like 2 sporting events in the same day on like one of the worst traffic days. And at this time I was commuting because we were living on the east side. And so my commute from like the Sculpture Garden home was already like 45 minutes to an hour. That day it took like 5 hours to get home. And I remember coming home just saying like, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not, I felt like I had enough pieces of the puzzle to like say, I'm going to start my own thing now. Like I've seen the inside, I've seen the outside. I've gathered my group mm-hmm. and, we're going to give this out. So I quit the agency, and, it was a little risky because we had hired, we were underway with the house.
Okay. We're going to stop.
Oh, yeah.
Folks, you have to tune in next week to hear about the house and about Lou's agency. Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreLawState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.